Well, job interviews can be nerve-wracking. With tips on how to prepare and feel confident, our career coach, Sarah Vermunt, everyone. Now, I don't know about you, I find interviews can be really challenging because you don't want to give those answers that everyone expects. On the other hand, you don't want to say too much that might not get you the job.
Exactly.
So, how do you prepare for a job interview?
Well, I think it's important to prepare but not practice. Sometimes when you are nervous, you feel like maybe you want to rehearse or even like write a script for your answers, and that is so not the thing to do.
Okay.
So think prepare, not practice.
All right.
And so if you're someone who likes to make notes to prepare for your interview, for example, I always tell people write bullet points, not sentences.
Yes.
Otherwise, you'll sound like a robot, right?
I am the best candidate for this job. This is why.
Exactly.
You don't want that.
I was having coffee last weekend with a friend who was doing some hiring, and he said, you know, we had this one candidate who seemed really great until about halfway through their interview. They asked the next question and they gave the exact same answer in the exact same sentence structure as they had just given.
Yes.
And they just slipped into robot mode and it actually cost them the job. So prepare but don't practice or rehearse.
Okay.
And so there's two kinds of questions you should prepare for.
Yes.
Prepare for the no-brainer questions that you know you're going to get for every single job interview. Questions like, tell me about yourself, or what's a weakness of yours is one that people should always have an answer to.
I want to know what the answer is to that one.
Okay,
Because you can't really, like, do you really want to know my weakness? Because I'm not going to get this job if I tell you everything.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what the wrong answer is.
Okay.
You can't say, I'm a perfectionist. That's going to get you an eye roll because it's not, you're really saying, oh, I'm going to work hard and there's really no weakness, so please hire me. The best answer to that question is to actually say what a legit weakness of yours is and how you work on it and get around it. So for example, if you're a really, let's say, introverted person and you have trouble sometimes interacting with other people, you might want to say something like, well, you know, I'm a little shy around new individuals, so I know I have to interact with others in this work, and so one of the ways I get around my shyness and introversion is to try and find an opportunity to talk to just one new person a day for 2 or 3 minutes, and it gets me out of my shell a little bit. So you're actually talking about a legit thing you're working on, but also how you address it.
Okay, all right, that's fair.
Now, the other type of question that you should always prepare for are the questions you're secretly dreading.
Right.
Right?
Like, why did you leave that other job?
Why did you leave
or what
your
happened
last job?
for the last 3 years that's not on your resume?
Yeah, exactly. Or a question like, where do you want to be in 10 years?
Yeah.
Not everybody knows where they want to be in 10 years, right? So you really need to put some thought into that because you don't want to be back on your heels in an interview situation, just hoping that they don't ask the question. Just be ready for it in case they ask the uncomfortable questions.
So if it's the, you know, 5 years, 10 years from now, think of where you would want to be and come up with something that's believable and that's kind of true.
Yeah,
right?
and it's also okay to be vague. So let's say you're not quite sure what you want in 5 years. You could say, like, let's say I was interviewing for a communications job. You could say, you know, I'm just moving into communications. I know I want to be somewhere in communications, but I'm not sure exactly what kind of role. I'm interested in these kinds of learning opportunities, but how those arrive in my career, I'm not quite sure. So that's kind of vague, but it's also true, right?
Now, if there was a break in service, let's say your last job, you got let go, like, and maybe it wasn't even a layoff, maybe it was a firing, and maybe the past 3 years you've been braless in track pants watching Netflix. How do you...
You don't want to get that honest.
How do you fill in the gap? So do you just say, I've been, you know, exploring other opportunities over the past couple of years and waiting for the right opportunity to come along?
You have to give a very vague answer if you've literally been at home in track pants for 3 years.
Got it.
But really, that's not the case for most people.
Right, right. You've been doing something. Okay, so expect the unexpected. I love this advice. So what do you mean by that, expect the unexpected?
So, I was in a coffee shop the other day, and there were people interviewing there. Like, it was not like for a job at the coffee shop, but like a professional came in, and you can tell the woman who was interviewing did not expect to be interviewing at a coffee shop. She expected to be doing it at an office. So you might actually have to interview at a less than ideal location.
Yeah.
So maybe you'll find yourself in a public space, and it'll be kind of awkward, and there'll be people listening to your interview.
Right.
Or maybe you'll have to interview not at a table, but on a big cushy couch or something. So really think about your wardrobe choices, right? So you might have to stomp it around the block to go to a different location. You might be like in sort of a slouchy situation, so make sure your buttons don't gap. Make sure that if you have to move around, there's like not a gap between your pants and your shirt.
Right.
Sometimes
this is so true,
the
though.
wardrobe matters. It
Yes.
really matters. Also, and especially ladies, shoe choices.
Yes.
Let's talk about shoe choices.
Well,
so
what's acceptable?
Sometimes you'll go to a job interview and you'll really ace the interview, and they haven't technically given you the job yet, but they're like, you know what? I want to take you around and introduce you to some people. So you might be walking around for an hour or two after your job interview. So if you are wearing 5-inch stilettos that you cannot walk in, that is not a good choice.
Right.
They're very pretty, but you have to wear something that's functional for you.
And the truth of the matter is you're actually being judged on everything.
Yeah,
so
you
everything could have gone well in the interview and you really vibe, but it's like she was hobbling around when we got to the 5th floor.
Yeah.
And she couldn't really make it,
so
and it was
awkward.
it was awkward. You could tell she was in pain, and then that
So
leaves
awkward.
a stain on the whole experience.
Yeah.
What do you do if it's a group interview? I've had them,
Yeah.
and it's quite the experience, having a whole table of people and then just you.
Yeah.
So what advice can you give for that?
So if you have a panel interview where you're being interviewed by a panel of people, keep in mind that you're not just responding to the one person who asked you a question, right? Like, the whole panel is there to see if you're going to be a good fit, to get a sense of who you are.
Yes.
So it's important to really make eye contact with as many people as you can. And also, the intimidation factor goes up when you're doing a group interview, right? When you're on a panel interview, rather. And so sometimes people's answers tend to get shorter just because they're so intimidated. A great tip for lengthening your answers when you're feeling really intimidated is to give your answer to the question, but then to add the words, "for example," at the end of your answer, and then tell a little story that illustrates what you're talking about. It'll make your answers longer and more interesting.
This is such good advice. I wish I knew you how many years ago? I was looking for a job. Very good advice.